Hello, I'm Rashard Willis, and my assignment will be on self-concept. Self-concept. Our learning goals for the day will be define self-concept and understand its aspects and components, and B, identify activities to help build students' self-concept. Again, A, we want to be able to define self-concept and understand its aspects and components, and B, identify activities to help build students' self-concept. I'd like to start with the video. I want to ask the question, how can teachers inspire kids today? Let's find out.
How can teachers inspire kids today?
7th grade is not your moment.
8th grade will be better.
Probably not.
With motivation.
Textbook.
From the world's weirdest textbook.
With understanding.
LeBron will never beat Jordan. Call me when LeBron has 6 championships.
That's your only argument?
It's the only argument I need, Sean!
With
Who has the answer to my question?
patience.
Maybe you should consider doing something else. Anything else.
Bad teacher. Rated R.
So, is that the best way for teachers to inspire students today? Well, dealing with self-concept, I don't think so. As you see, that was a clip from a movie called Bad Teacher. So, let's look at a way that we can inspire kids. Our essential question for today: how can understanding self-concept help me understand and help my students? Please write that down, because we'll come back and answer that question at the end of our lesson. Again, how can understanding self-concept help me understand and help my students? According to Brewster in 1999, self-concept is an individual's belief about himself or herself, including the person's attributes and who and what the self is. In layman's terms, how someone thinks about or perceives themselves, and how we think about and evaluate ourselves. So, self-concept is going to be how you see you, what you think about you, and how you feel about you. Self-concept has two aspects. The development of self-concept has two aspects. The first, the existential self. It's when someone actually realizes they exist. This happens to children at a very young age, 2 or 3 months to be exact. And they begin to realize that they themselves are an entity by themselves. They exist in the world as an object here by themselves. I have a 10-month-old daughter, and she's going through this now. And it's funny, one of the most interesting parts of watching her grow up is when she realized she had hands. Because she had one hand and she would move it, and wow, and she'd look over and she was like, whoa, I have a second hand. And they weren't the same. And then she'd look and she touched my hand, like, wait a minute, you have hands too. Alien person. She didn't know I was her dad at that time, just someone who took care of her. But what she did realize is, I am an entity. She began to realize that at a young age. I'm an entity, I'm here. And I'm not him, that's not my hand. I have my own hand, or two for that matter. The example I have up here is when a child smiles. and someone smiles back, that makes a child feel as though I'm an entity. Second, the categorical self. Once they realize, I'm an entity and I'm an object here, much like you and I realize, then they begin to categorize themselves. In other words, I'm one, or I'm two, or I'm a boy, or I'm a girl. They'll categorize themselves by age or gender, or another category to begin to group themselves. And this is called the categorical self. So we have a small activity. It's called, Who Am I? I'd like you to please grab a sheet of paper and a pen or a pencil, and I'm going to have you write down some things. It won't take very long. I'll give you time. First, I'd like you to write down 3 traits and 3 behaviors that describe how you are right now. 3 traits and 3 behaviors that describe how you are right now. Go ahead. Now, I'd like you to write down 3 traits and 3 behaviors to describe how you ought to be. 3 traits, 3 behaviors for you to describe how you ought to be. Go ahead. Lastly, I'd like you to write down 3 traits and 3 behaviors that describe how you ideally want to be. 3 traits and 3 behaviors that describe how you ideally want to be. Go ahead. So now, I want you to look back over all of the things that you have written down. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about you right now? How would you describe you right now? How would you describe how you ought to be? How would you describe how you ideally want to be? All of these tie in together to create self-concept. And we'll find out how. Self-concept is made of 3 different components. The first is self-image, what you see. The second, self-esteem, how you value yourself. And the third, ideal self, what you like to be. Again, first, self-image, what you see. The second, self-esteem, how you value yourself. And the third, ideal self, what you like to be. Still with self-image. Again, what you see in yourself. Now, a lot of people would think that self-image is you looking in the mirror and what you see, but that's not necessarily true. And in some cases, self-image doesn't even have to reflect reality. There are some people who are very healthy individuals walking around and they have a disease called anorexia. And they feel as though, even though they are healthy, that they are overweight. And that's a self-image. Even though what they see in the mirror, they may be healthy, they may be slim, but what they feel and what they think about themselves is that they are overweight. So our self-image doesn't necessarily have to match our reality and what we see. Kahn in 1960 investigated self-image by using the 20 statements test. So there were 20 statements, and he asked the question, Who am I? A lot of different ways. And within these statements, there were responses that were divided into two major groups. One, social roles, which would be mom, dad, teacher, doctor. And the second, personality traits. Happy, sad, joyous. These were the two type of major groups in response to the test. So now let's talk about self-esteem, which we which we look at as self-worth also. The extent to which you value yourself. Self-esteem self-esteem always involves a degree of evaluation. So in other words, when you're looking at yourself, you view yourself positive or negative, and you're evaluating yourself on some level. Some folks, regardless of their situation, have high self-esteem. They feel as if though the world is at their feet, they're going places, and they're doing well, and nothing can bring them down. High self-esteem is a positive view of yourself. And then there are others who have low self-esteem, who are not very happy with themselves, who don't think that things are going well, and they can never get ahead. This is a negative view of themselves. This is low self-esteem. Even if they may be a very pretty person, they may not think that they're attractive at all. Low self-esteem. How they view themselves negatively. Lastly, ideal self. What you like to be. This comes in two sides. We have a model here that talks about incongruent and congruent. And if you see here, those that are incongruent with their ideal self, their self-image and their ideal self are farther apart. It's different. Very little overlaps. They have a difficult time with self-actualization of who they really are. And then you have those who are congruent, where it overlaps a bit, a lot more, because they feel as if though they are themselves, and that person that they are with them actual selves is their self-image. We found that as you get older, your self-image and your actual self actually begin to mirror a lot more. Because of age, you are more congruent. Now let's deal with self-concept and the learning debate. The National Association of School Psychologists states that self-concept is frequently positively correlated with academic performance, but it appears to be a consequence rather than a cause of high achievement. What's interesting about it is kids who score high seem to have pretty good self-concept. Students may develop their self-concept more easily after demonstrating high achievement on tests, at home. The high achievement is what brings on the self-concept more than the self-concept bringing on the high achievement. There is academic self-concept, which refers to how a student understands their academic abilities. It's an entity all to itself with self-concept. And this is a person, an example. A student may see themselves or herself as intelligent, an excellent reader, and good at math, and they have a positive academic self-concept. I did a survey recently with some of my students, and you have some students who think that they're very good at math, and they may not be the best, but they think that they are, and they have a positive self-concept. If you take a survey, after the test, they may not think that they are once they've seen some of their grades, but those who did well still have a very high self-concept. And interesting enough, some of my students because of their effort, and they can see the growth in their scores. It may not necessarily be an A, but they can see the growth in their scores. They have a higher self-concept academically. So what activities can you use to improve your students' self-concept? Well, what you want to be able to do is incorporate these activities into your learning areas and make them natural with the things that you are doing. Just some examples. The interview. Well, a student actually interviews themselves. They write down questions and they interview themselves. They'll ask themselves questions where they give answers to themselves, positive answers. The journal. Students are able to go through and journal and write information about themselves that's positive, or even write a story or a poem or something of the sort that focuses on the good traits that they have. Create a me commercial. I love the idea of creating a me commercial for the simple fact that commercials advertise and promote, and this allows a student to do just that, advertise and promote themselves. Shared learning. What shared learning allows you to do is a student writes good things about themselves, then they can get up in front of their peers and share. Not only does it encourage them, it encourages their peers to feel as though they can get up and do the same thing. Builds great self-concept. Lastly, drawing self-portraits. All of our students like to draw. And the idea of self-concept is perfect because it's perfect with drawing self-portraits, especially if we're promoting students to feel great about themselves. These activities will help students to see themselves in a new way, even if they were not very high on the self-concept ladder. Hopefully after these activities they will be. Lastly, it's a little caption. What matters most is how you see yourself. As educators, we really want to drive this home. Now let's go back and look at your essential question and ask yourself, how can understanding self-concept help me understand and help my students? How can understanding self-concept help me understand and help my students? Do you want to be a bad teacher? I don't think so. And that's self-concept. Thank you. Hello, my name is Richard Willis, and my assignment is on self-concept. Our learning goals are define self-concept and understand its aspects and components, and B, identify activities to help build students' self-concept. I'd like to start with the video. Take a look. When I ask the question, how can teachers inspire kids today?
How can teachers inspire kids today?
7th grade is not your moment.
8th grade will be better.
Probably not.
With motivation.
Morons! Textbook.
From the world's weirdest textbook.
With understanding.
LeBron will never be Jordan. Call me when LeBron has 6 championships.
That's your only
It's
argument?
the only argument I need, Sean!
With
That's the answer to my question.
patience.
Maybe you should consider doing something else. Like anything else.
Bad teacher. Rated R.
So as you can see, that was a clip from the movie Bad Teacher. And I don't think that that's the best way to inspire students. So our essential question for today is, how can understanding self-concept help me understand and help my students? For this assignment, you're going to need a sheet of paper. If you could please write down the essential question, because we will come back and answer it at the very end of this assignment. Again, how can understanding self-concept help me understand and help my students? Let's define self-concept. According to Brewster, it is defined as a person's an individual's belief about himself or herself, including the person's attributes and who and what the self is. In layman's terms, how someone thinks about or perceives themselves, and how we think about and evaluate ourselves. The development of self-concept actually has two aspects. One, the existential self, when someone actually realizes they exist. This happens very early in childhood. Most children realize this when they are 2 or 3 months. And I have a 10-month-old right now, and it's amazing because she's actually still realizing this. They realize that they are a separate entity from others. They exist in the world as an object, all to themselves in time and space. The example I have here is when a child smiles, and then someone smiles back at them. The categorical self is the second. It's when they realize, after they realize that they are part of a separate entity, or an object, then they realize that they're part of a categorical group. In other words, they'll say, I'm 1, or I'm 2, I'm 3. Or they'll say, I'm a boy, or I'm a girl. They begin to categorize themselves by age, by gender, and put themselves into categories. So we have a quick activity, and it asks, who am I? I'd like you to please list 3 traits and behaviors that describe how you are right now. List 3 traits and behaviors that describe how you are right now. I'd also like you to list 3 traits and behaviors that describe how you ought to be. 3 traits and behaviors that describe how you ought to be. And I'd like you to also list 3 traits and behaviors that describe how you ideally want to be. That's 3 traits and behaviors that describe how ideally you want to be. Again, you're listing how you are right now, how you ought to be, and then how you ideally want to be. After you've listed these, I want you to go and look at them. These are what make up your self-concept of yourself. You may ask me how. Well, self-concept is made up of 3 different components. One is self-image, what you see. The second, self-esteem, how you value yourself. And the third, ideal self, what you like to be. Self-image doesn't necessarily mean that you actually relate to who you are. There are a lot of healthy people that are walking around who have a disease. It's called anorexia. Even though they may be healthy, they may be slim, they think that they are overweight. So their self-image doesn't necessarily match the reality of who they are. A test was done back in 1960. Kahn did an investigation. And the answers to these tests were actually split into 2 groups. People saw themselves in social roles, such as mom, dad, teacher, doctor. This is who I am. And they saw themselves personality trait. I'm happy. I'm sad. I'm funny. I'm smart. I'm not smart. Self-esteem, which is also self-worth, always involves a degree of evaluation. You evaluating yourself, whether it's to get something, someone, or a list of some things. High self-esteem is a positive view of ourselves. I feel good about myself. I feel like I'm going to be successful. I like to call it the Joel Osteen effect. Low self